Thanks for joining us as we continue to look at state politics and policy. We're going to have an afternoon panel here today of political consultants and observers to shed some more light on 2010. And today's panel will be moderated by the Center's Director of Research Studies, Paul Stickler. Paul is a nationally recognized documentary filmmaker whose critically praised and award-winning work includes many films. My own personal favorite is Last Man Standing. But he most recently finished Frontline's The Choice about the current presidential, the most recent presidential campaign, which aired on PBS. He regularly teaches the Center's course, The Modern American Political Campaign, which is a favorite among LBJ students, and it's, as I mentioned earlier, we have an interdisciplinary approach, so the course also attracts a number of law students and communication students, and like I said, it's a perennial favorite. So if you would please welcome Paul Stickler to moderate our panel this afternoon.
I was sad to realize when I talked to Paul Burka before the panel began that if you're not an elected state representative in the state of Texas, you cannot become Speaker of the House. And so I'm announcing I'm canceling my press conference after this panel. Kay Bailey Hutchinson, our senator, was talking about politics fatigue. What politics fatigue? I don't know. Are you the kind of person that wakes up in the morning right now and goes right to your computer to look for real clear politics and Politico and 538.com to see what the latest poll numbers are for the 2010 Senate elections? I know you are. So we're going to be talking about 2010. Why wait? I was exchanging emails with Paul Begala the night before the election, and we were talking about Texas politics. And he said, there's going to be a great change in American politics tomorrow, but I don't think Texas is going to be part of it. So the discussion we can have is there change? Was there any change? Will there be any change? I would maintain there's a great change. And let me just put this aside before I introduce our distinguished panel. I kept seeing a commercial for somebody running for office, and they talked about their religious beliefs, they talked about their conservative principles, talked about the fact they would be a judge who would not make policy, the guy running for Supreme Court Chief Justice for re-election, and the fact that somebody was running as a Republican Chief Justice who's conservative is also African American and nobody thinks it's a big deal is an incredible change. So that Obama's election marks an historic change in American politics, but for those of us in the audience that are old enough to remember what politics was like in the 60s and the 70s and how this American society has changed, it's almost miraculous. That said, is Texas politics changing? Now, I'm not going to introduce the bios over here. All the distinguished panelists have fabulous biographies you can read about in our wonderful brochure. I will say that as I'm going to my left, the political consultants here, James to my left, then skipping over Paul Burka, Bryan, and Kelly to the left of Paul. If I was running a political campaign, I would hire one of these three guys. That's why they're here, because they're smart, and they win lots of campaigns. In the middle, Paul Burka, an institution in himself for Texas Monthly. To Kelly's left, Christy Hoppe, the bureau chief of the Dallas Morning News, and Sean, one of the most popular political science professors that we call a government department over here in the University of Texas, who I believe also just recently, did you recently get tenure? I did. Associate professor. So I'm going to open this up. I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to try to keep this back and forth, and there's no reason why everybody has to do this back and forth, so I'm going to start with Paul. Because Paul has been here, I think, I was going to say the longest. You've been at least Texas Monthly for at least 20 years, 25 years?
Paul is a lot older than the rest.
Is our microphone on?
No? Yes. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to start off with this question, and we can, everybody can get a crack at it, but Paul, start. Is Texas an outlier, or is Texas changing in some way? Okay, are we really part of the United States? Is there going to be someday, sometime soon? I came out wrong. When will I be able to see attack commercials on my TV set during a presidential election or a statewide election and not have to go to YouTube?
Well, you could live in El Paso. That would do it. On the question, I think, is Texas an outlier? Yes. Is Texas changing? Yes. no question about that. Texas is an outlier. It has 27 statewide offices, 9 on the Supreme Court, 9 on the Court of Criminal Appeals, 3 on the Railroad Commission, and the 6 top offices in the state: governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, land commissioner, agriculture commissioner, comptroller. All 27 are held by Republicans. All 27 have been held by Republicans since 1998. No Democrat has been elected to statewide office since 1994. The Democrats made an effort to, not a very strong effort. They put some late money into the Supreme Court races. They actually, no one came as close this time as Moody came last time. Is that correct? So they actually went backwards on the Supreme Court. If you look at the states around us, and I can't tell you everything, but because I don't keep up with all of them, but there's no other state that I know of, with a possible exception of Utah, where Democrats are completely unrepresented in the electoral hierarchy. We have a few congressional districts. That's about it. So I would say it's an outlier in that sense that there are other states where, which are pretty conservative. That Montana being one that has a Democratic governor, and
2 Democratic senators too.
there are 2 Democratic senators.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have anything like that. And the main reason is George W. Bush. He was a Democrat killer. When he came, actually the Democrats were doing pretty well when he ran for governor. I believe in 1994 that when Bush ran, there was only, Rick Perry was the only statewide Republican. There may have been a railroad commissioner. I don't remember if Ray Horn was the railroad commissioner then, but Ken Hance. And when Bush left, when Bush left for Washington, all those seats went from Democrat to Republican. So I think so that makes Texas an outlier. Is Texas changing? Absolutely. The basic rule of Texas politics right now is that in rural Texas, it's overwhelmingly Republican. The battle for rural Texas is pretty much over. The Republicans have won. The battle really is for urban and suburban Texas. That's where the votes are, that's where the people are, and the Republicans are no better placed to win those battles than the Democrats, and maybe worse placed. The Democrats, I think, actually, although they did extremely well in Dallas County, they picked up the seat in Tarrant. They also lost one. They did all right in Houston. I think, Kelly, you probably agree, they underperformed in Houston, really.
Yeah.
They could have, substantial underperformance in Harris County. But the Republicans are strongest where the people aren't, and the Democrats are strongest where the people are. And I think that bodes very well for the Democrats. I also think that the other thing you're seeing here is, in the United States, and Texas is certainly part of it, is generational change. That we're at this period at the end of the 28-year period that began with Ronald Reagan's election. And I was speaking with a former SREC member from Houston, and he told me there are no young people in the Republican Party in Harris County. There's a number that you may know it, Bryan, but the average age of the Republican Party has gone from 42 to 56. I just don't know what the period is. But so I think that change is difficult for the Republican Party to deal with in the state. So the Democrats, are they going to control the state? Well, I guess that's where we're headed. But I think that they're still a cycle or two off from that right now.
James?
Sure. If you want to know if the state's changing, I think all you have to do is look at the extreme makeover of John Cornyn. He went from Big Bad John to something like Matthew McConaughey's dad doing his commercials in Lotus position. So, I mean, something clearly is happening there. You still had an increase in, in the urban counties. Dallas, Obama picked up, 7.5% over Kerry's vote. In Harris, we did 6. In Travis, we did 8. The problem is those counties' turnout just in raw votes pretty much mirrored the whole growth of the state. Where the growth is in the suburban counties. So Denton increased 20%, Fort Bend increased 24%, Williamson increased 23%. And each one of those, we cut margins, and Obama did like 8, 6, and 9% better than Kerry did. So I think the real story about 2008 is migration. And if Republicans want to stem the tide, they got to figure out how to build a wall to stop Californians from moving in. Because Texas is slowly becoming much more of a western state when we've always been very much of a southern state. And that's really going to change the politics about how both parties have to deal with things. For the Republican Party, to a large extent, it means the religious right and the cultural issues aren't going to be as driving. For the Democratic Party, it means if they don't know how to talk about economics and not just about social issues, they're not going to be relevant. And that's really where the battleground's going to be.
Bryan, you had a pretty good year for races. How do you see it?
What did you say, Paul?
I said you had a pretty good year in
Okay.
races.
And Burka, you said Republicans are strong where people aren't, and Democrats are strong where people are? Okay. What I saw on the battlefield was some shifting. Republicans maintained their dominance statewide primarily because they won a supermajority of the independent voter, the non-straight ticket vote. What I saw this election was Republicans won mail-in ballots, which historically had been more a Democrat group of voters. And that may follow the trend of the older voters voting more Republican. But, this was an exciting election. There was a high voter turnout. But I think we did burst the myth of how do you interpret primary turnout. Democrats outvoted Republicans statewide by over 2 to 1. But yet Republicans running statewide all pulled on average around 54, 55%. And so the challenge facing Democrats, I think, is twofold. I think still there's a lot to be done in Texas with getting Hispanic voters to go vote. Challenge facing Republicans is getting Hispanic voters to go vote. Hispanic voters just aren't voting in the proportions that the other segments of the state are turning out. I think Republicans also are dealing with a circumstance of as more urban voters vote and they vote a straight ticket, that puts a lot of pressure on Republicans to have to win the non-straight ticket vote. But you can look at Houston. Has Houston gone the way has Harris County gone the way of Dallas County? In Dallas County, straight ticket Democrats have outvoted straight ticket Republicans in 6 of the last 6 elections. In Harris County, straight ticket voting has kind of been close and gone back and forth. And in Tarrant County, Republicans still have a fairly dominant lead countywide on straight ticket voting. So one place where Democrats benefited this election wasn't in existing voters shifting their political ideology or shifting their political preference. Where Democrats gained in urban areas was getting new voters registered and turning those new voters out and then having those new voters vote a straight ticket. I think it is interesting to note that in the state Democratic primary statewide, area by area, it varied, but between 40 and 60% of all the people who voted in the Democratic primary in Texas, 40 to 60% only voted in one race. They voted in the presidential race and then they walked out of the ballot. They didn't vote the rest of the ticket. So I think a challenge facing our state is getting people to be very informed in voting the whole ballot so you don't have undervotes. And I think a challenge facing the Republican Party is addressing this issue with straight ticket voting and the disparities that they face this election.
I would key off of what Bryan just said, and also what you asked Paul about, will you ever see attack ads on TV? We saw this year the result of Texas not being in play in the presidential race in that underperformance in Harris County this week. I see our good friend Dana DeBeauvoir here, which gives me the opportunity to say that she and some of the other elections administrators around the state have done a wonderful job in pushing early vote, and as a result, Travis County and some other areas, South Texas especially, have learned to bank their votes early. And so by the time Tuesday rolled around this year, there just weren't that many votes as some of our estimates and our hopeful projections would have indicated. So we banked our vote a lot earlier this year, and that was because we had a presidential primary at the time. In the primaries, I'm sorry, I'm going back to what Bryan said, a lot of people came to vote in the primaries. That was because we had a contested primary. Then many of those people did not come back this week because we did not have a contested general election in the presidential race. Those who did come back, as Bryan notes, tended to vote Obama and then leave, or McCain and then leave. So in the rural areas where the people aren't. So part of what's happening here is a process, too, of how we actually vote and over how many days and how well we do at getting people to come out early. The other thing I would add is, and Bryan, again, has heard this rap, so forgive me, Bryan, I don't think he completely buys it, but I think that the stats from this week showed it, and that is the unmarried women sort of led the way for Obama in this race. They voted 70% for Obama and 29% for McCain. This is the first time unmarried women have really been a significant driver of votes in presidential elections. They were also a driver this week. I was involved in a lot of U.S. Senate and congressional races in other states. They voted, unmarried women voted 64-29 Democratic versus Republican in those races in other states. So there is a demographic shift, as James alluded to, that is not just Hispanic versus Anglo, but are some other demographic groups, such as unmarried women, sort of stepping up and taking charge of their own franchise. They outvoted Hispanics and the much vaunted youth vote that Obama was going to bring to the polls. The youth vote was up, but unmarried women even outpolled the youth. So the shifts, I think, are demographic rather than partisan, and they are affected by the process of actually voting.
In some ways, I think Texas has been insulated because we have not had the economic downturn that you've seen throughout the rest of the country. Some of these swing states that went from red to blue, such as Ohio.
Hide and watch.
Yeah, and so there is not the discontent. Perhaps, hopefully, if there won't be, but if it does, in the next year or two or three, Republicans own it. 27 of the statewide seats is all of them. The House, the Senate, the governorship, all of the statewide are owned by the Republicans. So, in some senses, there's only one way to go. And while the blue tide that swept the rest of the nation, it didn't really affect Texas instrumentally, I think the Republicans recognize it's beginning to rain, and that there are, with the slow erosion of their majority in the House, we have a speaker's race that's going to be probably like none other in the next month or so, especially if it turns out to a 75-75 tie in the House. That will be a fun one to watch, to see who can win just one person from the other party over to give control of that, the all-important House to the Republicans or the Democrats. I think demographically we are shifting, not just from California. I've watched it in Nevada, for instance, one of the key swing states. It also went from red to blue. One of the main things there was not only is it the highest foreclosure in the nation, and that had a lot of effects, but also Hispanics and California influx was huge there. We're seeing some of those same demographic changes in Texas. One of the things is that Hispanics do get out along the border and vote very well in the primaries. That's because all those local machines are involved in local races are working very hard to churn out the vote. And once the primaries are settled, well, there usually are very few Republicans making a contested contest come November, and so all those machines are satisfied, and no one's churning out the vote. So it depends on whether the national RNC or the DNC or some other folks want to come in and churn up the waters a little bit if we have some highly contested races. Not only did Bush come in and kill all the Democrats, he salted the ground. I mean, there was, without any political office, you have no way to raise any money. You have no machines. You have no one in the local levels except your local parties trying to get numbers and names and money and candidates. One of the things that you saw in the primary, the highly contested primary this year, is that Democrats have a list. They have a list of names for the first time in a long time of a lot of voters, over 2 million voters who came out and voted in those elections who were willing to vote Democratic. And so that also helps gin up your game. Anyway, so some of these little factors will make a difference, and I think in the time to come.
So is Texas an outlier? So it's certainly not an outlier when you look at its Republican nature. It had the 13th highest total for McCain among states. So there were 12 states that were more Republican than Texas. It is an outlier, though, in the fact that Paul Burka was talking about, and that there aren't Democratic state leaders for Democratic Party to get excited and to start building an organization around. In each of the states that are ahead, maybe again, well, even with Utah, you have a House member, Matheson, who's pretty popular among the Democrats in Utah. But you don't have that yet here in Texas.
I want to get into some party dynamics and look at the Republican and Democratic Party in a couple of different ways in terms of their current state and their future. The first is the whole idea of candidate-oriented influences on the future of the party. In 1980, when Ronald Reagan won for president, it was the first time, I think, in generations that voters under 30 voted Republican. And for those political scientists out there or people that study the polls, you know that the way that people tend to vote when they first vote, they tend to vote that way the rest of their lives, to a certain extent. So there was a cohort of younger voters who stayed Republican during all that time. In 2004, John Kerry won 54% of the voters under 30. And if I'm to believe my friend Matthew Dowd last night on Evan Smith's Texas Monthly show taping, he said that, and I could be wrong about this, he may be overblowing it, he said it was 65% of voters under 30 voted for Barack Obama this time. This is, to a certain extent, a candidate-oriented influence. At the same time, there are obvious demographic changes in the United States. What does it mean in terms of the growth of the Hispanic population? And if we're shifting back from the 40 or 42% of the vote that George W. Bush won in 2004 to more of a 70-30 split as the Hispanic electorate grows, is this what you can owe the changes to, let's say, a place like Nevada, which not only went over to the Democrats this time, but it went over by 11 points, which is fairly amazing. Okay, that said, let's concentrate on the Republicans then. We've had two of the Republicans who perhaps will be running for office again in 2010. For those of you that have been here all day long, you can make your comparisons between Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst and our senior Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson. And by the way, at 3 o'clock today, Houston Mayor Bill White will be here speaking as well. You know, who knows, he may be running for statewide office sometime, I don't know. But it'll be nice to have everybody stay for him. So let's start with that. Is Kay Bailey Hutchinson inevitable? We did invite Governor Perry here today, by the way. He was busy. But at the same time, when I sent out an announcement about this, and I was trying to be funny about the deal, and I said you might see the next governor of Texas at this conference, I got back an email from one of his closest advisors, and he said, maybe not. So you make the call on this. Is Kay Bailey Hutchinson inevitable, or is there something else going on in the Republican Party? Bryan, why don't you start?
So glad.
Let me interject an aside. I think some of this observation of the success of the Democratic Party, and the Democrats are certainly owed a compliment for their fine performance nationally and in certain areas of Texas. But I wonder, hypothetically, what if the race had been between Democrat Joseph Biden and Republican Sarah Palin? Would the outcome have been the same for the Democrats? You know, I don't know. I mean, I think people were voting more for change. They weren't voting for platforms. They weren't even voting on specific policy positions. They were voting for change. And when you look at polling, we kind of have swept this under the carpet, but Nancy Pelosi had the second highest negative rating of any politician in the country, next to the president, who had a pretty bad one. And I think people were basically voting for something that inspired them. It didn't matter whether it was Republican or Democratic or independent, like Ross Perot in 1992. They were looking for leadership. They were looking for inspiration. And this thing about age, come on now. Barack Obama was younger. John McCain was older. Older voters went for the older candidate. Younger voters went for the younger candidate. It was generational, but I don't really think it was a magnet where the Democratic Party was attracting a certain type of people. And like Kelly said, I have many races where, like in Harris County, where Noriega won the Senate race in Harris County, Obama won Harris County, but yet we had Republicans polling 52 and 53%. Not very many of them, but a few of them. And why was that? Why would Harris County, which votes for Obama, why would they even elect any Republicans? Well, they were voting for leadership. The people they elected were the people that they felt exhibited the better leadership in the offices that they were seeking. So I think in terms of transitioning this aside to your question, Paul, I think in 2010, people again will be looking for leadership. And I think in the governor's race, they're looking for leadership. And you can take the three individuals that are here today. Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst has exhibited some good leadership. I think Senator Hutchison is by far the most popular elected official in the state of Texas, not because of the Republican Party, not because of her ranked Republican tenure in the Senate, but because she's a person that gets results. And you look at Bill White. Bill White is, I can't say that I historically know this, but if he's not the single most popular mayor in the history of Houston, I don't know who would be more popular. But he won his last re-election with 90% of the vote. 90%. Now, his opponent wasn't much, but generally an opponent will get 30% just by being on the ballot. But Bill White received 90% of the vote. In the Woodlands, Montgomery County, not this past 4th of July, but the preceding 4th of July, the Woodlands, Texas, which votes probably 99.9% Republican, who was the grand marshal of the Woodlands 4th of July parade? It was Bill White. Now, in part because he had agreed not to annex the Woodlands into Houston, so they were celebrating. Maybe that had something to do with it, but that took leadership. You didn't see Bill White as the grand marshal in Kingwood, Texas. So I think 2010, people will be looking for leadership. And I think, leadership ebbs and flows. I remember one election, Carol, Keaton, Strayhorn, Rylander, Strayhorn, whatever. One election, Carol was the base race for the Republican Party in Texas, which means she received the least number of votes of any Republican on the ballot. And then it was an election or two after that, she was the top of the ticket. She received the most votes of anyone on the ballot, because there was a point in Carol's career where she was really highly thought of for leadership. And don't confuse leadership with popularity. And I want to say this in defense of Governor Perry. And I'll go back to 1994. In 1994, we were doing polling statewide, and I remember getting a phone call at 7:30 one morning from Lieutenant Governor Bullock. And he wanted to know why we had released a poll that showed that more voters had an unfavorable opinion of him than had a favorable opinion of him. And in the same poll, we had the voters having an overwhelmingly positive opinion of Governor Richards. And so after he yelled at me and called me a bunch of interesting things, I said, well, Governor, what would you rather be? Would you rather be Ann Richards, who everyone loves and no one will vote for? Or would you rather be Bob Bullock, who no one likes, but everyone's going to vote for re-election? And he goes, well, I see your point, and he hung up. Right now, a lot of people, Governor Perry's last statewide name ID was 1-to-1, positive to negative. Generally, most of the time, if you're 1-to-1, you're not going to get reelected. not unless you're Bob Bullock or Phil Gramm or someone like that. But just because you're popular doesn't mean you're going to be elected either. People in Texas loved Governor Richards. She was perhaps one of the most beloved governors we've ever had, but when it came time for her reelection, she didn't exhibit leadership. People liked her, but she didn't exhibit leadership. And sometimes to be a leader, you have to make tough decisions that isn't going to please everybody, which is extraordinary about Bill White. I think being mayor is the toughest elected position of all the elected positions in Texas because you're right there next to the people. When your trash is not picked up, you blame the mayor. But Bill White, 90% on his reelection, clearly an up-and-coming star for the Democratic Party if he were to choose to run. And where was Bill White when the National Democratic Party had their convention this year? Was he in Denver? No, I happened to be in Houston while that was going on, and I was with the county judge who's a client, and we were at a press conference with the mayor, and they were talking about coordinated services between the city and the county for veterans, re-assimilating veterans back into the community after they had done their duty in the military. And that's the kind of leadership that I think people are looking for. They like the leadership being exhibited by people who can get things passed and can err on the side of compromise and not err on the side of partisan rigidness.
I'm curious, Bryan, if Carol went from the base to the highest to making robocalls in Austin for nobody in particular, is that like a cycle going up and then down?
You know, she is one tough grandma, and so I wouldn't want to critique her.
Someone else on the future of the Republican Party. Paul?
Was this the...
What's the Kay Bailey question?
Are we saying
but
Kay
also-
Bailey inevitable? How could anybody say that Kay Bailey is inevitable? No one has any clue of what she's going to do. She said she was going to run twice. She didn't run twice. I think Kay's been a terrific senator for Texas. I think she's sort of in the old-fashioned Lloyd Bentsen mold of taking care of the state and bringing home the bacon, which is not necessarily a favored view these days. But I certainly don't think she's inevitable. Kay, and I've known Kay for a long time, and I do like her very much as a politician. But Kay is, I'm giving you a pretty standard view here. She's risk averse. That's the term you hear a lot. Or you hear she wants to be anointed. And there was a famous, for inside players, there was a famous event in El Paso when she was thinking about running in '06, when she sort of walked into an ambush with a bunch of Republican fundraisers out there who were Perry people, and she soon thereafter decided not to run. So the race against Perry would be a brutal race. The Perry people believe that they can use Senator Hutchinson's votes against her about a nanosecond after she voted for the bailout. Perry came out against it, and undoubtedly that will be an issue in the campaign. She supported, the S-chip bill. Did she vote for it before she voted against it? She was support all the way. And so there are some of these votes that won't sit well in the Republican primary. This is a Republican primary fight. And the mathematics of Texas elections is that we have a state of about 23 million people. And there's only one election that matters, and that's so far in recent years. That's the Republican primary. The Republican primary typically is about 650,000 people. It was twice that in the presidential this spring because of the presidential race and because people came out for other things. But nevertheless, you divide that in half, and 325,000 people, in effect, are controlling the politics of a state of 23 million. The people who, and those people tend to be the social conservatives, the far right base of the Republican primary. Perry is, I think anyone would say, would have no trouble getting to the right of Kay Bailey Hutchison in a primary. And so Hutchison has to weigh that. Kay is more popular than Perry. Now, I heard his numbers were trending up a little bit.
His positive's trending up, but his ballot strength is not.
Okay. Anyway, it's going to be a tough, bitter fight. And I think does Perry have the stomach for a tough, bitter fight? You betcha. Does Kay have it? I don't know. I'm not convinced of that. And remember, it's not one tough, bitter fight, it's two. Because I think the Democrats will finally field a major candidate for governor, possibly Bill White, but possibly someone else. So I believe that Perry would lose a general election fight against almost any well-known, well-respected Democrat, of whom there are about three. Right. Or
Well-known scale.
so I don't think Kay is inevitable. I think that if you were to look at the possibilities, Kay runs, Rick runs, Kay doesn't. Rick runs, Kay runs, Rick doesn't. I think there's a pretty reasonable shot that neither of them will run for governor in 2010. Perry because he can't win, and Kay because she doesn't want to take the risk. So I must tell you, I will hear from her tomorrow. Nothing escapes her, and when I go to see her, she quotes it back to me. So,
It's interesting too that Zogby did a poll in Harris County a couple of weeks ago that the Houston Chronicle paid for, and though Zogby has a plus or minus margin of error about 20%. But still, John Kerry he still thinks won the race 4 years ago, but. Zogby ran an interesting ballot question. It hypothetically ran Kay Bailey Hutchison versus Rick Perry among all voters, and Senator Hutchison won quite handily. It ran Senator Hutchison against Rick Perry just among Republican primary or self-identified Republicans, and she won quite handily. And it ran Bill White head-to-head with Kay Bailey among all voters, and Bill White won Harris County against Kay Bailey, because Bill White is a big fish in a small pond and a very popular politician. But if I had to predict based on not who's running against Kay Bailey, but here's where I would put my money. If she runs, she will win big in the primary and in the general. And if she runs, just as Barack Obama was a magnet and Hillary Clinton was a magnet and attracted new people to the polls, Kay Bailey Hutchison running in 2010, the Republican primary will heavily outvote the Democratic primary, heavily outvote it, because Kay Bailey Hutchison exhibits leadership. And I think she's tough. She's a tough boot. I think she can take on anybody and all takers. She does it in the Senate. She's very Republican, but she's also very mindful of the people she represents, and she votes her state oftentimes, even when the party may be going a different direction, and she's courageous when she does that. So, anybody that puts their hat in the ring running for governor is going to be tough. And I think Rick Perry's tough. I think Bill White is certainly tough. But I think Kay Bailey is maybe a little tougher, in my opinion, than what Paul may be giving her credit for. And I don't think she chose not to run in 2002 or 2006 because she was afraid of winning. I think she knew she would win. I think she was sizing up whether it was the right time and how destructive it would be to the party to take on an incumbent governor and dispatch or defeat them. So winning was never a decision in her past assessments of whether to run. I think it was whether it was the right time. And I think the signals she's giving now are signals of whether 2010 is the right time.
Isn't she, I've heard, she's ahead of Perry with every segment of Republican primary voters?
Well, we ran a crosstab on a poll recently. We looked at people who who were devout NRA members, who favored vouchers, and who were absolutely opposed to abortion under any circumstance. That's a pretty conservative group of people. And she beat Perry by 8 points among that group.
Let me expand the discussion, because there'll be two sides, I think, in 2010. And with all due apologies and respect to the people that have run before, Tony Sanchez in 2002, Chris Bell in 2006, and Rick Noriega in 2008, this is not the A team, in terms of candidates. Now, the question I have is for 2010, and obviously Mayor White is going to be here, is there an A team for the Democrats? Or are we waiting for the second coming of Henry Cisneros to be able to energize the always waiting for larger Hispanic electorate? I mean, what will the Democrats do in 2010, or are all the A team, whoever they may be, and you guys can help us in terms of who the A team is, are they all waiting for 2014 or 2018, or take it away? Kelly.
I'm going to let James. I didn't work for any of those 18. I guess I did for Sanchez early on, so I have to own up to that.
Take it away, brother. You already started.
How about Donna Howard? I'll just pick somebody, just out of the thin air. I actually think, seriously, that Democratic decisions about their chances in 2010 are going to hinge on 2009 and any possible special U.S. Senate election to replace Senator Hutchison if she decides to step down and run for governor or do anything else. I think that it depends on the special election next month in the Senate District 17, State Senate District 17 race, whether the momentum from this week carries forward to that and Chris Bell, the Democrat, is elected to the State Senate. Does that momentum then carry into 2009 for a special U.S. Senate election? Does Washington, does the Obama administration, does Congress not fall apart in the next 6 months, in the first 6 months of next year? Christy mentioned the economic situation, which is really the only issue of everything we've talked about that matters right now. If the Texas economy goes in the tank during the first 6 months of next year, which is highly likely, what is the political landscape going into 2010? When Democrats are making their decisions about running, they will have to file on the 1st of January 2010, so they will be making their decisions about mid next year. So it is way too early to write off, that there is no A team and all that. I think a lot of people will look at this momentum and where we are about 7 or 8 months from now, and they'll make their decisions.
Can I try this? I love you, Kelly, but there is no A team. Every Democrat who's run statewide has lost. John Sharp, even our own Kirk Watson. Right now what we have is a junior varsity because nobody has been able to break through there. And what we're doing is we're having a Democratic Party that is just putting itself back together. They're taking victories on the county level in Harris County. They're taking victories on the county level in Dallas County. They're taking victories one at a time in the House, sometimes 2 or 3 seats every 2 years. But this is where the Democratic Party is right now. Yes, if the economics tank, then Katie barred the door. But is there anybody ready to step up and run statewide and put the whole Democratic picture together, charismatic and can raise the money? And I don't see it right now. I think Bill White has as good a chance as any. He has his own personal finances. He might not have to tap that. He was head of the Democratic Party in Texas. He has tentacles going out everywhere that will help him fundraise. But at the same time, I can't recall any instance in Texas where a mayor has assumed statewide office. Not Ron Kirk, not Lila Cockrell, not You know, there have been some big names in big places, in big cities, but none of them has ever risen to a statewide office.
I'll piggyback on there not being an A team. I think after Bill White, the list gets pretty thin. I think part of the interesting phenomenon among Texas is that even the Democratic members of Congress don't strike me as being good statewide candidates, with perhaps the exception of Chet Edwards. But other than that, like the list is pretty short.
You know, I hate to be a Republican giving advice to Democrats, but I'll do it since this is academia. I think Rick Noriega needs to be commended. He finally has put the Hispanic candidate back on track in Texas. And it's been a long road for the Hispanic candidate in Texas ever since Henry Cisneros went through his scandal, being on the cover of Texas Monthly. That's some kind of a jinx, isn't it, Paul? And then you look at Lena Guerrera, you look at Dan Morales, you look at, I'll say this respectfully, Tony Sanchez. Hispanic candidates have just not fared well, and some of those who have been caught in some really bad scandals have tainted the possibility of future Hispanics to do well in Texas. Here comes Rick Noriega, and I will say this, he finished his campaign a lot stronger than he started. I think that little stupid black fedora he wore hurt him. But you know, John Cornyn's his votes went down with the ads that he ran. I think he was overly preaching to the choir, to rural voters that he already had in hand. But Rick Noriega did reestablish, I think, the credentials and the credibility of statewide Hispanic candidates. And if I had to throw some names out, looking for dynamic, young, leadership-oriented politicians, I would look at Rafael Anchia in Dallas. I would look at Letitia Vandepute in the state Senate. These are relatively young elected officials who I think have the ability to run in 2010. And if I'm Bill White, I want to put a strong Hispanic candidate or two or three or four on the ballot to run with me that can attract and excite and stimulate the Hispanic population of Texas. It's still sleepy. It still hasn't woken up yet to politics. And I think Rick Noriega did open the door. So, you know, it's kind of like Clayton Williams. Clayton Williams shot himself in the foot, reloaded the gun, shot his other foot. But one thing Clayton Williams did was he finally broke through. That's a Jim Maddox quote. But he finally broke through, and he provided a dominance for Republican candidates in rural Texas, particularly east of I-45. And I think Rick Noriega provided an opportunity for other Hispanic candidates, maybe himself, to come back and be a trailblazer. And I think some of these names you mentioned, Kirk Watson, I think, is a dynamic leader. You know, as a Republican, I hope none of them are running statewide in 2010, but I suspect some of them will. And there are many others. And the Republicans, you know, it's not to be too hard on Democrats. What's the A-team? Beyond Kay Bailey Hutchison, what is the Republican A-team? Yeah, David Dewhurst is A-team. But what is the A-team? You know, the Republican Party has to look within itself, too, and find young, dynamic leaders to run. It can't put all John McCains on the battlefield. But you look at the diversity of the Republican Party, it elected 2 statewide African-American candidates to statewide office. So voters are open. I think there is a colorblind aspect in politics in Texas today, and I think there's an open door for all groups to run. And I think the emergence of the Hispanic candidate to be what Henry Cisneros almost was but never really realized. I think that's the opportunity in 2010 for the Democrats.
I would just add quickly that, you know, a couple years ago, and not even probably that long, people were still asking, is it possible for an African American to get elected president? And now we can kind of go in hindsight and see the changes in popular culture, to see the changes in generational shift that made all that possible. So I think it is possible to say that a Democrat is going to get elected, potentially even in 2010, if not earlier. And you look right now at some of the things that are changing, and one is finances. Democrats ran much more funded campaigns at the state rep level, and to a certain extent, even at the statewide level, on the coordinated efforts that the party did, that put them really at an even keel with a lot of things. So you also see the grassroots infrastructure building that we neglected for a long time. And that's aside from the Obama campaign shipping half our people to New Mexico, Colorado, and Ohio. But at least we know that those people are willing to work, so.
I would just say that on that race, I think that White is going to look at both governor and United States senator. And there was a lot of talk in Houston that he would run for governor, and then it kind of changed that he would run for senator. And the reason is that it's going to be an open seat, whereas if he goes for governor, he'll probably run into Kay, and that he would rather take the path of least resistance and do the open seat, where he would probably have a much better chance of winning. So, and I think that's a smart move for White. I think the Democrats are going to establish themselves. Running in an open seat is a lot better bet. So I would expect White to run statewide, and I think White also has a good chance to raising money at $1,000 a clip. He knows a lot of people who can $2,300 now, so a lot of people who can give him that money. He has a huge list, and he's been in Washington, tied in with the Clinton machinery. So I wouldn't be at all surprised to see White run for the Senate.
And you'll be able to ask him that specifically, which office he wants to run for, and perhaps he'll actually answer that question in a little while. By the way, Paul, if there's a curse for people appearing on the cover of Texas Monthly, since Matthew McConaughey was on there the month before last, is that why his latest movie, Surfer Dude, tanked at the theaters?
Well, then we had UT on the cover, and they lost
And
to
we
Tech.
lost Tech. So who gets it next month? You know, there's
one second away from 50,000 sales.
You know, there was a joke up in Massachusetts. I'm not sure if they told it here in Texas. The same year that Clady Williams lost for governor in Texas, John Silber, who had been a dean here at the University of Texas and then was a legendary and very interesting president of Boston University, ran for governor of Massachusetts, and he was about 4 times smarter than his opponent, and managed in the last month to do Clady Williams. He shot at both his feet, both his arms. And the joke in Massachusetts was if Silber had spent the last month of the campaign running for governor of Massachusetts in Texas, and Clady had spent the last month of running for Texas governor of Massachusetts, they both would have won. That said, let me ask one last question. There's a speaker fight that's about to go on over here. The bad person in me hopes it's 75-75, so chaos and craziness reigns over the legislature, so that we have something to cover. Not that it's going to be all that organized anyway, but perhaps. I would suspect that part of the fight for the speaker has something to do with what people are looking forward to in terms of reapportionment after 2010. I assume from when I'm talking to folks that, at least in the Republican Party, part of the attachment to Speaker Craddock has been planning ahead to be able to control apportionment. How do you guys look at the probability of what reapportionment is going to mean, especially with an Obama administration, with a judiciary which, under the Voting Rights Act, is going to be able to pass judgment on this probably a little bit different way than the Bush administration did? Would reapportionment change Texas politics that much, or is this just, again, inside baseball?
So if we look at the House of Representatives for the U.S. House, and we look at the number of votes that the Democrats got versus the Republicans, the Democrats should have about 14 and a half seats. So they're a little bit underperforming at the U.S. House level. Although interestingly, in the House races this time, of the 16 closest Texas House races, only 3 of them were Republicans who won. So I think that the districting scheme in place right now for the U.S. House is pretty good for Democrats. But for the U.S. House, there are clear places where it could improve for the Democrats.
The House members who have won, they picked up 6, they lost 3, but these were in Republican-drawn districts. These were districts that were drawn by Republicans for Republicans. So that in itself tells you a little bit about the changing dynamics and demographics of the state. But also, interestingly, I think Texas will pick up a congressional seat, maybe 2, come reapportionment, just because of the population.
3 or 4.
3,
Right.
really?
Oh, at least
Okay.
3.
Yeah, I think
At least 3.
So that in and of itself will change how the districts look and how they carve it up. It'll make it a little harder, I think, maybe easier to pack. We'll see.
You want to go ahead?
Well, I had a House member stop me on the way in before the panel, and he said that if it's 75-75, that we ought to have a dual speakership, one Republican like on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and a Democrat on Wednesdays. And maybe a two-headed beast would be better, I don't know. But I think what makes this speaker's race interesting is it's been 16 years since really we've had a speaker's race that was coalition-oriented, where you had maybe a group of legislators from one area of the state get together with legislators from another area of the state, or you might have a Hispanic caucus get together with some rural Texans. And I really do think this is, with the parity in the balance of power in the House, we're looking at a coalitional circumstance for Speaker, not so much a partisan circumstance, which we have seen. And I will say this, in the early 80s, my clients strongly favored, my Republican clients strongly favored initiative and referendum. They strongly favored term limits. They strongly favored a bunch of things that once they took the majority in the state, they quit favoring. They no longer favored initiative and referendum or term limits or judicial appointment rather than election. And you look at gerrymandering, which is what redistricting is. Senator Jeff Wentworth in San Antonio has a really good proposal, I think. He says, let's go to a nonpartisan, very idealistic way of doing apportionment, and let's draw the lines based on demographics. Let's not draw the lines based on how many votes Obama got here or how many votes McCain got there. And I can't really see us ever getting to that point. I think it's a great idea. But, you know, in the 80s, in the 90s, and now here we are in 2000s, the party in power always starts out right after redistricting with a whole bunch of seats. And then it kind of melts away as the demographics start shifting and changing, because a change in demographic has more an effect on the political voting than a change of philosophy or viewpoints.
Can I just add the whole idea of a redistricting commission? Perhaps its best feature, and I think it's especially true here in Texas, is it would just take that poison out of the Texas legislature, so they wouldn't have to go through that process, and so they could actually be worried about other things other than these explicitly political problems, in addition to the benefits that it might have with creating moderate districts.
What would Christy have to do?
Well, I think what you'll see in 2010 is we've been talking about the governor's race, but the races that are likely to be the most important in 2010 are the controller's race, the land commissioner's race, the attorney general's race, because those are seats on the redistricting board, legislative redistricting board. If, for example, the Democrats control the House in the 2011 session and the Republicans control the Senate, each House can block the other's bill, but it would go to the redistricting board. And the redistricting board has 30 days to act. The current districts that we have were drawn by the redistricting board chaired by John Cornyn. If Paul Hobby lost to Carroll by 20,000 votes, 30,000 votes, if that race had gone differently, the Democrats would have controlled the redistricting board in that year, because Bill Ratliff voted with the Republican lieutenant governor would have voted with the Democrats, with Laney. So I think those are races to watch, and each party is going to try to put somebody forward. There could very well be open seats for that race, as, for example, General Abbott tries to move up from Attorney General. That would be an open seat. And I think there's going to be more money spent on those races than has ever been spent in history on those races, those three positions. The other two members are the lieutenant governor and the speaker. If whoever controls the House gets one of those people. And I am sure that Tom Craddock lives to eviscerate the Democrats in redistricting. He cares more about that than anything except pork for Midland. He filed the original redistricting lawsuit that I think they drew a line right down his street and put him in the district that was in Lubbock. Midland, they carved Midland into 3 counties, and Craddock challenged it in court and won. But he is a man who remembers every slight, every offense, and he will be out. If he wins this time, the chances are that he would win next time, and then he would be able to handle redistricting. So that's what we have to look for down the line.
I think we have time for one or two really good questions. They have to be really good.
Can I actually ask
Oh.
a question?
I wish you would.
So I want to ask my fellow panelists what the effect of not having George Bush and Karl Rove helping to organize the Texas Republican Party is going to have on the statewide races in 2020.
Bryan makes a lot more money.
I mean, is there really? I mean, there's 3 or 4 different offices that really matter to the public, and there's about 10 Republicans that see themselves in each one of those. So, how much did George Bush and Karl Rove make sure that those 10 people stayed in line, and how much are they going to be hurting the of not having him be as powerful as he was previously?
Well, Republicans are going to be, in general and in particular, much better off without Karl Rove. You look at the last 3 elections, Democrats have won more net seats nationally, even with George Bush winning in 2004. Democrats won more seats nationally than Republicans. And I think it has to do with Karl as a brilliant statistician in terms of running campaigns. He's not very sensitive to the ramification or the policy or the consequence of the tactics used to win elections. And I think you're going to see a more dramatic shift towards campaigns that are more, all politics are local. They're going to be focused on local issues and local approaches. And here again, the fact that Republicans were able to win in Harris County when Harris County went for Obama. And Christy, I have a question for you. Could you explain why the Dallas Morning News, as Democrat as Dallas County is, why it editorially endorsed John McCain?
Because our editorial board thought he was the better candidate, but that is the
answer.
Based on what?
And that's the editorial board. I don't talk to them, and they
Oh.
don't talk to me.
As a
these are
consultant,
really
that's what
good
I'm always
questions.
told. We don't talk to the reporters. Reporters go, we don't talk to the editorial board.
These are really good questions. Are there any more panelist questions to other panelists? How about one question from the audience? I see somebody standing, but she's, oh, okay. Where? Deese.
Paul, I was just so intrigued by your comment right at the end. If Craddock wins Speaker this time, he'll be the Speaker next time, too. And I'm just curious to have you explain all that.
You don't really want me to say this, and I don't really want to say it, but there is one party that always manages to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, and they're going to do it this year, and they're going to do it next year. If they do it this year, they can't help themselves.
Talking about Dallas Cowboys?
One more provocative question. But I think his hand is up first, though.
Now there's all this pressure. I don't know if this is provocative or not. You all know Texas is an anomaly in that it's one of roughly a dozen states that even has straight party voting. So apologies if this is too wonky. My question is, what is the bizarre constellation of planets that would ever have to happen for straight party voting to disappear from the election code in Texas? And for as long as it's around, what, if any, is its significance in light of the large-scale demographic changes that you're talking about, or that we've heard a lot about today?
I bet Dana de Beauvoir ought to answer. I like straight party.
I think we need to ban it. I think straight.
The Obama campaign did a lot of research on that too. So a lot of their growth in new voters are not necessarily partisan voters. They definitely lean to the left, but the idea of organization structure that they're going to vote straight, it doesn't appeal to them. So as we try to expand the pool of Democratic voters, we need still a broader message without it just being the machine message part of it. What you'll see still is that it's a critical part of our urban centers in Travis, in Harris, and Dallas. It's still going to be a critical part to that as we expand on top of it. But as you see, a lot of the younger voters, and it didn't really increase the percentage, but a lot of the new people that got involved are not going to be straight party voters.
And straight ticket voting is, since it's a phenomena of the general election, you can look at what happens across Texas when people run for city council races or school board races or even within a Democrat or Republican primary. And how many times have all of us gone to vote and we don't know anything about the 100 different people that are running for judge or this education board or whatever? I think straight ticket voting does make voters lazier because it allows us to focus on maybe just the top of the ticket or one particular local race that we have a passion for. And without straight ticket voting, I think voters would take a little more time to be better informed about all the people running. And but there have been some pretty interesting characters in the history of Texas politics that have won office by just sneaking in on a straight ticket ballot. But I don't think straight ticket voting is really a problem in Texas politics. I think it's really more a challenge for voters just to be better informed. And one thing is there are people who do split their ticket.
And on that note, this panel has now definitively answered the questions I care about. Will there be competitive two-party elections in my lifetime? Will Kay Bailey be the next governor? And we've said a definitive maybe. Let's hear it for the panel, and please stay here for Mayor White at 3 o'clock.